C-Clear's eco-innovator project is supported by a grant provided by the Pollution Prevention Institute, and our community is very grateful for them challenging us to find creative ways to exchange innovative ideas, build capacity, and advance our common goal of reducing pollution for our environment. So please join me in welcoming Kate McCardle to the podium.
My name is Kate McCardle. I'm with the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute. The goal of this eco-innovator project is to find creative ways to exchange ideas, to build capacity, and to advance this common goal of reducing pollution in the environment. They put out an application, and basically anyone from the state could apply for this, and we're very excited to have 3 winners from that join us today. We have with us Mark Greger, who you heard from earlier, Paul Swaco, and we also have Sean Miller with us. So first of all, congratulations to all the 3 of you. Yeah, so we invited municipalities, consultants, other entities to submit short case studies that were based on the EPA's outline for climate smart brownfields. So I'm going to quickly go through what those 5 categories are, and then when the speakers come up, they can talk a little bit more about and delve into those categories. But quickly, the 5 categories for EPA, if you don't already have them tattooed on your arm. Category 1 is to reduce energy use, right? So that is minimizing total energy, looking for projects that were using renewable energy systems and cleaner fuels. Category 2, air pollutants. So how do we reduce air pollutants and the emissions? Category 3, we're looking for projects that would reduce water use and the impact to water uses and resources. So that's, of course, trying to employ best management practices for stormwater and reclaim and store water for reuse. Category 4, materials management and waste reduction. To conserve material resources, obviously we want to minimize waste reduction in these projects in any way that we can. Beneficial reuse waste material. And lastly, category 5, which was ecosystem and land use conservation. So looking for projects that would use native species, minimize disturbance of current habitat. So those were the 5 areas, the 5 categories, again, based off EPA's climate smart brownfields that we were looking at. The team reviewed all of the projects and chose the 3 eco-innovators that you're going to hear from today. So our first case study is from Mark Greger, who is the manager of municipal environmental programs at Labella Associates. And as you heard earlier from our commissioner who introduced him, is recently retired, but this doesn't look like retirement to me. I don't know if it looks like retirement to you. Does it look like? No, this doesn't look like
a little bit, yeah.
Okay. But we are so happy to have Mark here today, and I'll have him come up and talk about his case study now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I only have 3 slides, and this is one of them, so this is going to be brief. But before I begin, in the interest of full disclosure, when this project that I'm going to talk about was conceived, I was the manager of environmental quality at the City of Rochester, and it was probably 5 or 6 years ago that we first started thinking about doing this. And when I say this, we're actually talking about integrating 3 separate projects to sort of create the best of all worlds and create a win-win-win for the City of Rochester. I'll talk just quickly about what that meant. But I do need to acknowledge some key staff people at the City of Rochester. Ann Spalding, who is now the manager of environmental quality at the City of Rochester, and started our energy and sustainability office a few years ago. And Joe Biondolillo, who's a senior environmental associate now at the City of Rochester, who handled all of the environmental work through the state's inactive hazardous waste disposal site program and our consent order compliance and coordination between solar development and basically landfill closure and delisting. So I just wanted to make sure that I made those points. Also, I need to acknowledge Labella's Associates' role in this project, not just because I'm there now, but also because for 5 or 6 years, they had major role in terms of the remedial investigation, consent order, compliance activities for the City of Rochester, as well as work at the Port of Rochester Marina project, which was the source of, as Commissioner Jones referenced, about 100,000 yards of iron slag that we beneficially used as the pad for the solar project. So very quickly, the solar project involved taking a portion of the former Emerson Street landfill that was a municipal city landfill that was also an inactive hazardous waste disposal site. The city was under consent order to address the remaining site issues associated with that Superfund listing. And we also knew that we needed a solid, sustainable reuse of the site, and the site that I'm referring to is about 13 acres of that former landfill. We also had a lot of material that we were going to be generating at the Port of Rochester to construct the new marina up there, and we knew that a significant proportion of that would be iron slag from a former foundry and steel mill that was located adjacent to that site. So the challenge was to put all these pieces together, close out a portion of the landfill, just properly reuse and sustainably reuse the iron slag, and create a reuse that will save the city some money, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and sort of be a leadership case study for this region. So this project is the first large-scale City of Rochester solar project. So I guess high-level comments on the project, and then I'm sure we'll get into some questions later on. Let's see. So some key points. Solar energy reuses on landfills and brownfield sites are becoming quite common, and much more common than they were even 5 years ago. The point that I would make is that they're both technically and financially feasible. So if you have a brownfield site, you might want to at least be considering, in a preliminary way, solar reuse of those sites. If you are an owner and you have accounts, energy, electrical accounts, you should also consider potential power purchase agreements and remote net metering structures to offset and significantly reduce your electrical costs as a result of solar generation on your brownfield site or landfill site. And the site owner benefits are very clear and simple. Lower net energy costs, repurposing of landfill or brownfield acreage if there's not another viable reuse, and in some cases, solar is the best reuse. And kind of an unanticipated benefit to the particular power purchase agreement arrangement in Rochester is the avoidance of long-term operation and maintenance costs for that site, because the solar developer who retains operational responsibility operates and maintains the site over 20 years or 25 years. So some key points and advantages and benefits of this kind of a project. A couple of other things. There are some other structures that now exist that need further exploring and that are available to brownfield site owners, but also in the solar arena, and those are beyond power purchase agreements where you have a single off-taker who owns both the site and the electricity accounts. Community shared solar, in which individuals can, a large number of individuals can access potentially renewable energy generated at remote sites, and community choice aggregation. And these are all things that are out there that are tools that are legally available now in New York State that we should be considering. The other point that I would make, and we have a lot of DEC people here, creative brownfield and landfill site repurposing, as well as materials management, which is the beneficial reuse of, in this case, it was solid waste, require a lot of close coordination and working with the New York State DEC in New York State. So you need to start early, have those conversations, and follow through on those things so that those approvals can be in place at the time that you need them. And then finally, just a reinforcing message that these are becoming more common projects. You don't have to be an expert in solar power generation or even an expert in remedial technologies. Those kinds of experts are out there. We heard from some of them earlier. There's assistance available from NYSERDA on setting up these kinds of projects and programs, and I would encourage everyone to at least look at them, particularly if you're an owner of a brownfield or a landfill. So, thank you. Did I meet the time limit?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mark, and great job providing a high-level overview of that project. We will have time to do questions after. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Paul Sawajko, who I've worked with for many years in the area, Water Education Collaborative Coordinator at the Rochester Museum and Science Center, who will be talking about his project, Regional Green Infrastructure Showcase there. And let me pull up here. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Good morning. As you heard, so I'm just going to be speaking about the Regional Green Infrastructure Showcase that has been recently installed at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. And just quickly kind of going through the practices, GI practices that we have installed. The theory here is that these are full-size practices, GI practices, put in place on a public campus so that anyone, developers and municipal people, residents, whatever, can go and see what they look like, learn about how they function, and maybe incorporate them into some of your redevelopment. And you may have to incorporate some of these to meet stormwater regulations. Also, of course, if you're doing any upgrades or maintenance to your infrastructure, if you want to go green, these might give you some ideas as to how you can do that. So in a nutshell, green infrastructure just means that we're trying to get stormwater to infiltrate into the ground and therefore take it out of storm sewer systems. So we're trying to get the water out of the sewer systems and into the ground, or it can infiltrate into the ground. So this is an overall schematic of the museum, of the area that includes the GI practices at the museum. If you're not familiar with, well, first of all, I'm hoping you're familiar with where the museum is. It's at East Avenue and Goodman. So this is the main parking lot, is where we're starting. And you can see on this schematic where that is. We have 3 zones, and so I'm just going to talk really quick about each zone and what kind of infrastructure we have in each one of those. So zone 1 is principally the parking lot, and that was a parking lot that was a standard impervious surface, and it was removed and replaced with a pervious surface asphalt, and so that allows the water to just go right through that asphalt surface, and it goes there's like a retention area below it full of rock, and then the water will then infiltrate into the ground. This was the largest component of the project by far. But in that you can see the outline of the parking lot. There are also, where the trees are, those are bioretention areas. And along the right side of the parking lot is the driveway that was not refurbished, so that's still impervious, and that water would run over into those bioretention areas. The bioretention areas are islands within the parking lot, a little bit redundant, but we wanted to put them in now should some of the parking lot get clogged up over time. Those bioretention islands will be available to take the water. And then going down from there, you'll see an area that's I'm going to show next, which is the educational pavilion. This is a shot of the educational pavilion. Notice that it has a green roof on half of it. The other half has a standard roof. So we're collecting water off the standard roof, and it's going down into that collection glass below it into a rain garden, which is out in the foreground. The third thing on that is the traffic circle, which is a fairly simple revision. We closed off, there were some storm drains in front of it. We closed those off and direct the water into the traffic circle, so that's a bioretention area. The next zone is, as you can see, there was a lake problem. They had Lake Joseph, I think it was, after the facilities guy. Anyway, very simple fix. Put a couple of chases in there to direct that water over to the garden area, the rain garden. There's a new installation, but it receives the water off of that roadway. Their roadway was also repitched a little bit and resurfaced to make it flow better. And then the third zone is, as you can see up on top, the picture there, the sidewalk. That's where they had their bus drop-off. So you would get, 100 elementary school kids get off the bus and jump right into those puddles, which they probably enjoyed, but I'm sure the staff at the museum didn't care for. So what we did was replace that whole strip of sidewalk with porous concrete, and also there's some bioswales. You can see the larger area. Over here on the left, the yellow is a patio area, so that water all drains over into the bioretention area that you can see there. And there are also the green squares are trees, and that's a flex pave, pervious surface, so the water can go down and water those trees. Water off the driveway flows over to those trees as well. Lastly, we have some rain barrels. There's a roof disconnection, and the only way you can tell that is you can see the gutter coming down there on the left in the first rain barrel. So we're collecting water off the roof here of this building, storing it in rain barrels. Overflow goes into that rain garden in the foreground. And the rain barrels, when they're full, they are used periodically to water the garden. Way over, you can't really see it, but we have a treadle pump, which is a foot pump that visitors can use to pump water out of those rain barrels into the garden. Trying to get some interaction in here for our visitors. And then inside, we have GI exhibits, which go into more detail as to all of the technologies that we've used and explain how GI functions. I'd like to acknowledge New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation. They're the ones who funded this $1.4 million project. However, obviously the museum was a strong proponent from the beginning. Stormwater Coalition also was the force that kind of drove the museum into that direction, so it worked out very well. And that's it.
Great, thank you. And we'll have time for questions. But one thing to note is what's amazing about that project is that they'll have 350,000 people a year going through and witnessing this firsthand. And obviously the museum excels at providing direct education to its visitors. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our last panelist, Sean Miller. Sean is the president of Genesee Environmental, and he will be presenting the Hancock Housing Area Site Clearance Project. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here. You guys didn't make it easy, so thanks for that. But I'll do my best.
They'll do fine, just fast. Yeah, that's right.
When we were invited to attend the conference and invited to submit a case study, I picked this project and sent it. People don't normally think of the demolition and asbestos process as it's kind of the ugly duckling, the necessary evil of the remediation process of the brownfield redevelopment process. Everyone has their horror stories about that part going badly. But in this case, this is an example of when it went well. So the project in question, we were contracted by an affiliate of Center State CEO, which is Hancock Field Development Corporation. The engineer for the project was Barton and LaJudas Engineers. The scope of work was a large former military base housing facility, 83 structures, a lot of buildings, all in horrible condition, all laced throughout with asbestos-containing materials, friable and non-friable. And they were faced with a very tight schedule, a very tight and finite budget, and a question of how to get this site cleared so that it could be redeveloped for a useful purpose. For the structures above grade on site, they had deteriorated to a condition where the only option was to demolish them with the asbestos in place. There was no going in and extracting the ACM prior to taking the structures down. But what we were left with was all slab on grade construction, and within the slabs, the original construction, they had used asbestos transite pipe as the air ducts for the buildings. So if you can imagine that all of your forced air heat all winter long blows through asbestos cement ducts. I'm sure there could be a study done on the results of that. But so we're left with this condition. And you're talking about more than 10,000 tons of concrete slab. Now, if the demolition proceeded with the ductwork still in place, it would get commingled with the rubble. No way to extract it, so therefore everything would have to go to the landfill as regulated asbestos waste. Not a great solution and not a very cost-effective one either. When we got into the bid process and working with Barton LaJudas, with the building standing or with collapsed buildings laying on top of the slabs, there was no way to trace out how the slabs ran. And even with what research was done, it was found that each slab was a snowflake. You would go from one to the next. The buildings looked identical, but when they ran the ductwork, they ran it in just Dr. Seuss configurations at times. Why did they do that? But they did. So there was no way to know prior to cutting into the slab exactly where it was going to be. So that was the challenge. We had to come up with a way to find those and get them out without cross-contaminating the remainder of the concrete slab. So we're smart guys. It was a competitive bid, lump sum bid. So whatever approach we took, we were stuck with, and we were on the hook for it. We took a look at the situation. We looked at some work we'd done in other places and work that others had done. And we came up with an idea. Hey, if we take forced air, kerosene, salamander heaters, duct it into where the furnaces used to tie into these systems, blow them full of hot air, look at that slab with a FLIR camera, we'll see where it runs. And we did that. And it worked, but it was slow. It was not nearly as efficient as we had hoped it would be. Setting up the system, waiting for it to heat up so that we could go through with our camera. And so we supplemented that with a more efficient procedure, as it turned out, using the electrical signal utility tracking like they use for finding gas lines and water lines. And we took a page from their handbook. And since these were non-metallic lines, we used detectable routers to run up into the ducts, send a signal through, find it that way, much faster, much more efficient. And as we got into the process of removing, as is often the case, is always the case with our work, you don't know what you've got until you get into it. You can make an educated guess, but everything is a latent condition, everything is concealed. You're going to find out when you start how it's going to go. Wow, that was a quick 5 minutes. So yeah, in the process of doing the removals, our folks came up with techniques to more efficiently separate the material as we were working without commingling, and we'll leave it at that. The upshot is they saved 10,000 tons from going to asbestos waste landfill, which was over $500,000 in cost savings. The reduction of fuel usage saved about in excess of $20,000 for not having to truck that material to the landfill versus a nearby recycling location. And we saved about 1 million square feet of poly liner that would have had to go into those 500 trucks. And I'll wrap it up.
Great.
Thank you.